It's been 4 years since I set up my 6700K system build, and now I'm wondering, is it the right time for an upgrade? So why now? Why am I looking to upgrade? Well, AMD and Intel have been battling it out for a while now, and AMD really has some good value coming to the market in multi-core CPUs. So I'm looking at my 6700K going, it does everything I needed to do today. It plays games, it can do rendering, it can produce videos, albeit a lot slower due to the core count, but it's a great CPU and it's treated me very well. 4 years with this system and it still runs every game I play, it still does all of the work I want it to do. This is a great system. Now I'm kind of looking at, if I want to build something newer, Intel's got some really good options, 12 core, 24 thread. AMD's got some really good options, 24 core, 48 thread. And so I'm kind of looking at AMD now going, this is really interesting. I've never built an AMD system. My first Intel system was a 2.8 HT socket 478. So it's been a long time that I've been running Intel. I've been an Intel flagship supporter for probably since I started building computers when I was about 18, 19 years old. So I'm looking at my 6700K going, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to get an upgrade going. So what kind of things do I consider when I'm looking at upgrading my CPU, my computer? Well, I normally go for about 30% gains on single core performance. But nowadays, if you look at the stats, we're seeing single core performance gains since Skylake 6700K. We're only seeing performance gains of about 10% single core performance gains. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to point out that the 2.8 HT Pentium 4 was released in 2003. Between 2003 and 2007 to the QX9650, we saw a 32% year-over-year performance gain. From the QX9650 to the 6700K, we only saw a 16% year-over-year increase. And with the 6700K in 2015 to the 9900KS in 2019, we've only seen a 5% year-over-year increase for single core performance. So we can see that there's been a huge drop in single core performance gains in CPUs since about 2015. So we're kind of at the point now where the only way to make a CPU faster with current technology, even though they're making it smaller and use less energy, the only way to make it faster is to either increase the core speed or add more cores. We're really in a good time right now because multi-core CPUs are actually in at a good price point now. So the problem is when I look at the top end, I look at the top end Intel, I look at the top end AMD, and all I see is 10% gain in single core performance. So unless I'm planning on doing a massive multi-GPU rig, this isn't going to be worth my time. The 6700K overclocked to 4.6 is a performer. It works really well. It's still probably one of the better gaming CPUs. At the end of the day, the 6700K Skylake is still a lot of what the architecture that Intel's using today is based on. So what would be enough to entice me to upgrade? Well, pricing's been in a good range for AMD systems. A high-end multi-CPU AMD system is really cost-effective to get into right now. So really, I have, I could consider AMD or I could consider Intel. Either way, at this point, I don't know which way to go. I really want to do a new system build. I'd like to do a new case. I'd like to do hardline water cooling, which is something I haven't done before. And I'd really like to get into something a little beefier. I'm really excited about PCI 4 M.2s, which means I'd have to go AMD right now. I'm actually really excited about AMD. I used to be 100% Team Blue, and now I'm looking at AMD going, they're bringing some really good things to the table right now. They're really putting a fire under Intel, and what AMD's on 7 nanometer process now, Intel's still kind of almost 10, kind of pushing to get their newer CPUs out for later this year for desktop. But again, I'm looking at single core performance and I'm going, you know, if the single core performance is only giving me a 10% gain, there's very little reason to move to a new system with 4 cores and 8 threads, because I already have that. You know, it's kind of disappointing to me that after 4 years, almost 5 years since Skylake's launch, we're still looking at 4 core, 8 thread, single core performance at a 10% gain. And you know, the other thing for me is GPUs. So I've got the 980 Ti, and even with GPUs, if I look at the 1660, whether it's the 1616 Super or the 1660 Ti, the performance just isn't enough to justify moving to a new GPU either. So after 4 years, I'm kind of looking at this system going, the only reason for me to upgrade would be, A, I'm a PC enthusiast and I want to upgrade, you know, every 4 or 5 years. I'd upgrade sooner if I could, but these things are expensive. So really, after 4 years, there's not a lot of performance gain moving to a newer 4-core, 8-thread CPU. You know, I've already got 32 gigs of RAM. So again, this system has very few limitations. And really, the only thing that slows me down with this system is that when I'm doing video editing, the video editing time takes a lot of time. If I had a 32-core system, this thing would video edit way faster. But at the same time, I look at the downtime on this computer. You know, with Adobe Premiere Media Encoder, and you can queue up all your videos that you want to encode, and you can just leave it on overnight. Let it encode overnight. You know, the computer really is sitting doing nothing for the 8 hours that I'm sleeping and the 10 to 12 hours that I'm at work every day. So really, that's a time where I could be utilizing the 4 cores and 8 threads to do all my rendering for me. And it just, at that point, doesn't make any sense to go ahead and do an upgrade. You know, the more I talk about upgrading, the more I feel like I'm talking myself out of it. But I really do want to get into a new system. I want to get into, you know, maybe an AMD. I'd like to look at maybe 16 cores as my next system. If I'm going to upgrade, it needs to be at least, you know, 30% faster single core, or you know what, I'll take the multi-core. If I can get 4 times as many cores and 4 times as many threads, then my productivity work can increase quite substantially. So, you know, there's a lot of things to consider when upgrading a CPU. You know, my old way of thinking of 30% gains on single core performance being the point that I'm going to upgrade, you know, it may be a long time before we reach that. And, you know, so I may end up with this system for another 3 or 4 years. And honestly, I'm getting kind of bored. I'd like to build a new system. I mean, every computer enthusiast out there knows that there's that new CPU, that new computer case. You know, water cooling has really become prevalent in the last 4 years. And, you know, I was really skeptical. I was very skeptical about water cooling. I was always worried about leaks, and I'm a very paranoid person. So I'm like, oh my God, my system's going to leak and it's going to be destroyed. And you know what? I've been running the Corsair H110i all-in-one cooler now for 4 years. It's really performing well. And about 2 months ago, I wasn't really happy with the performance of the cooler. So I lapped the CPU and I flattened out the bottom of the heatsink, and I'm getting lower temperatures than I was when I first installed it. But you know, the H110i, it hasn't leaked. The pump still runs well. I think my only complaint about it is the fans are too loud. I'm running the Heaven benchmark right now, and I can hear the fans just super loud. So, you know, when I went with the all-in-one cooler, the intent was that I wanted a system that was quieter on an all-in-one water cooler than and my old air-cooled PC, which we'll do another video on later. Do a little revisiting of what my computers looked like, you know, 12 years ago. So yeah, it's very loud. So like if I move the audio, I'll do a recording of it and I'll show you how loud it is, and I'll just kind of superimpose it here. But it is really loud. The fans are really loud. And I think that's my biggest complaint with the all-in-one water cooler. And you know, it's a big rad. It's a big 240. I think it's even bigger than, I think it's a 280. I think it's a 280 millimeter. You know, should be more than enough to cool a little 6700K. And you know what? It does very well. Like right now, it's been running Heaven benchmark for about 25 minutes. And it's sitting coolant temperatures at 35 degrees. And GPU temps at 76, radiator fans are running at about 1400 RPM, and the CPU temp sitting at 46 degrees. It's bouncing between 36 and 44 right now. And that's with the case fans set to their standard speed. That's not even on performance. I've switched to headphones recently, so it kind of drowns out a bit of the sound. But even with headphones, I find it's just too loud. So the next system that I build, I want to go all in. I want to go big 300, 400 millimeter rads. I want to get hardline cooling. I want to get a nice D5 pump with a really good tube reservoir. I want to get more space inside the CPU, which probably means I want to get more space inside the case, which probably means a bigger case again to make room for custom water cool mounts. Although, this case probably could do custom water cooling mounts fairly well. It is kind of designed to do different plumbing, to be able to put radiators in. But, at the end of the day, I think it's time for me to retire this case and retire this computer. Within the next year, I'd like to build something new. What do you think I should build? Should I build an AMD system or an Intel system? I've never built an AMD system, and I'm really being drawn to the idea of building an AMD system right now just because of the performance, the technology, their 7mm, their PCI 4. There's a lot of benefits right now going with AMD, and Intel doesn't seem to be reacting very quickly. I always think of Intel as that company that has a lot of technology available, just kind of like tucked into the drawer, and they're just waiting to pull it out and stomp their competition. But AMD really has done a good job of putting that fire under Intel. And, I can say that since I'd say about 19 years now, I've been Intel. And I've always been Intel. I've always said Intel's the best. Going through CPUs, like I mentioned, my first CPU is a socket 478 Intel Pentium 4 2.8 HT. My next CPU was a QX9650 quad-core Extreme from Intel, which was a $1,200 CPU. And that CPU was just blew the 2.8 HT out of the water. And I used that in my old gaming rig for a long time with two 9800 GTXs and SLI. I want to revisit that system maybe in a couple of weeks. I've always looked at AMD as the runner-up, the one that was always trying to play catch-up. Your performance per dollar was always really good with AMD. I had a lot of people, arguing with me back in 2004, 2005 that, AMD was really great and you could overclock it. Then Intel came out with their Core 2 Duos and Core 2 Quads, and AMD kind of disappeared off into obscurity again. And I know there's a lot of diehard AMD fans out there, and I've never seen why AMD fans are so diehard. I've looked at manufacturers really going hard with supporting Intel gaming PCs and high-end Intel motherboards. But at the same time, Intel, for me, it's always been about PCI lanes. Lately, Intel's mainstream systems don't have enough PCI lanes to run all of the devices that I'd like to run in my next build. Multiple M.2s, multiple storage lanes, maybe multi-GPU, although that's kind of no point in that anymore. My only upgrade path right now is more CPU cores, or a 2080 Ti. I don't really want to get a 2080 Ti knowing that the NVIDIA 3000 series GPUs are probably not that far down the road. I don't know what Intel's going to be doing, so I'm not going to be, really selecting a CPU yet at this point. What are your recommendations? I'm thinking 16 cores, 32 threads, maybe 64 gigs of RAM, a couple of M.2 storage drives, and maybe a couple of maybe a few like 4 terabyte, 6 terabyte standard hard drives. Although, I'm actually considering going with a 2 terabyte SSD instead of going with the standard spinning hard drives. I think, it's getting to that point now where we're not very far from completely eliminating having spinning storage in our computers. SSDs are still pretty expensive if you get into the 4 terabyte, 2 terabyte range. For an M.2, so it's still a little cost prohibitive, but we'll have to see when you can buy a 6 terabyte hard drive for 129 Canadian. So maybe you guys can help me out. What CPU should I go with? Intel or AMD? And what kind of case should I build? knowing that I want to do a water-cooled build. I live in Canada, so getting computer parts and water cooling parts is a little more difficult here, and everything's a little bit more expensive. So what are your thoughts? Is now the right time to upgrade? Is it a good idea to move from a 6700K to higher core counts with similar single core performance? Or should I just tough it out, wait another year or two and see what the market holds? I don't think I can do that. What would you do? Leave me your comments below and we'll see you in the next video.